Good morning and welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. Well, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Trinidad and Tobago, they have various committees made up of leaders and professionals in the financial and accounting arena. The Taxation Committee is responsible for advising on changes in tax legislation, facilitating tax training, and maintaining a formal link with the Minister of Finance and Board of Inland Revenue, amongst others. And while the discussions of late have been centered on the CLICO fiasco, worries on the Sea Bridge and the resulting investigation in the process, we're also nearing that time, the end of fiscal 2016-2017 and the presentation of the budget for 2017-2018. Now, ICATT is leading off the discussion on our pre-budget wish list. I'm joined by the Executive Director, Tax and Legal Services at PriceWaterhouse Coopers, Keith Robinson, and Manager Tax Deloitte, Shivanand Deopersad. Both are also members of the ICATT Tax Committee. Gentlemen, good morning.
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 How are you all?
Good,
Fine.
good.
All right, so
Thank
tell
you
me,
for
first
having
of
us.
all, it's a pleasure to have you on this morning. Any changes expected in the tax legislation thus far?
Well, there are certain things that have been promulgated in the past years, and therefore we expect to see changes coming in those kinds of areas.
So have discussions started, and well, obviously, I'm sure discussions would have started pre-budget consultations, and you would have outlined a number of recommendations. Do you care to share those with us so far?
Yeah, sure. Just to set the tone for it, what usually happens is that the Ministry of Finance reaches out to key stakeholders to get some ideas as to what are the things that people would like to see, and we will familiarly refer to that as the wish list.
Yes.
And ICATT, through its tax committee, has submitted some suggestions. Some of it perhaps new, but some of it has to do with things that are ongoing and have been spoken about for years that we think as a tax committee that are needed in order to enhance the entire tax practice in Trinidad and Tobago.
All right.
Yeah. So I guess I will kick off. The first one is the Revenue Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that has been spoken about for a number of years, and we know that it reached a certain point and then it fell off the radar. But it is something that, as a tax committee, we feel that a revenue authority will certainly help in the administration of taxation in Trinidad and Tobago. The Board of Inland Revenue has been doing perhaps its best in the circumstances, but there is need for some updating to be done in terms of their systems, etc., so that you get a better tax administration. The country has been encouraging foreign direct investment, and investors look at your tax regime. They look at things like certainty in the tax, etc. Are there rulings on issues that might be ambiguous so that there could be a smooth operation?
Yeah. Mr. Deopersad, now, with respect to the property tax issue, where are we with it, as far as we know?
Well, the issue with the property tax is that, unfortunately, there was a defect in the 2009 legislation where the law specified only a single filing obligation by April 2010. So there is no annual obligation to file. And so what has happened is that the tax is applicable and the government can technically collect the tax. But the ability of the government to link a property to an owner, that is the fundamental flaw. And the legislation needs to be updated for the filing obligation to be an annual filing obligation instead of a one-off 2010 filing obligation, so that the properties can be linked to the owners, and therefore the information can be collected and the taxes properly collected.
Yeah, no, this is a major setback, given the fact that with respect to the stagnant economy, reduced revenue collection, cash flow, and continuing deficits, it's something that we definitely look forward to in helping us or bailing us out to some extent. Let's talk about the impact this can have on us.
Yeah, I would say that the property tax really is an important lever in our fiscal regime. Reason being that our tax legislation is actually fairly narrow in terms of the scope of taxation generally. We have corporation tax on businesses, payroll taxes, value-added tax in the main outside of the energy sector. So what we have now is that in need of more revenue, we have a 30% marginal rate for larger companies. Now that is slightly higher than the OECD average of 25%. So that could push us into a less competitive space in terms of foreign capital. And the VAT regime, any VAT regime, is inherently regressive because it taxes consumption, and individuals, poorer individuals, always consume more of their income than more wealthy individuals. Property tax, by contrast, is inherently a more progressive tax because one would assume that wealthier people own more property, therefore it's inherently more progressive than VAT. And it has the appeal of value-added tax, where it has a wide base. So it has the progressive feature as well as the base, and also property cannot be hidden. So therefore, the scope for avoidance is very difficult relative to both VAT and income tax.
Now, we're hearing a lot about taxing, and we're talking about fuel prices. A lot of persons are wondering, what would be the issue with the situation? Can we expect fuel prices to increase in this next budget?
Well, the government has been moving towards removing the fuel subsidies and bringing prices closer in line. I think they have done that in the past couple of budgets. I think in the last one with respect to diesel. So that it is a possibility that perhaps they might continue to work on reducing that fuel subsidy. In terms of timing, the state of the national and the global economy might not dictate that such things should happen, but it's a possibility.
Now, bearing in mind that the Minister of Finance would have inherited or come into office probably 2 weeks after they were just elected, they had to prepare a budget given the economic downturn and the many challenges. What are some of the recommendations this time around, given the issues with the sea bridge, the property tax being, thrown back a little bit? What are some of the recommendations you can make this time around?
Well, one of the areas of focus is the fiscal regime for the oil and gas sector. Since this particular government regime has come in, they have been working with the IMF on the development of an optimal, we might say, fiscal regime for the sector. They have been having talks with stakeholders because one of the things that exists currently is the accelerated rate of write-off of capital expenditure, which we heard the government saying that they inherited that, and that would have been part of the reason for reduced taxes coming from that sector. So we expect that there should be something happening in terms of the reform of that regime.
Now, when we talk about the issues that we face, you said that you also were hearing from some organizations as well in terms of the wish list. What are some of the items on the wish list?
Some of the items that we have received from our membership has been based on doing business in Trinidad and Tobago and implementing measures that would ease the doing of business. Some companies smaller companies would face tremendous issues with the speed of receipt of VAT refunds. So we have had suggestions from some of our members regarding how the government can perhaps do some kind of segmentation where the smaller companies that their cash flow issues would be quite inhibiting, that they could do something to assist with the speed of release of VAT refunds. We have had a number of persons sending information to us with respect to just general tax administration, the processes for objections at the BIR, some of the areas where the tax law is ambiguous and there is need for perhaps a ruling or an amendment to clarify those things.
All right. Are there any other items on the wish list that you wish to raise with us?
Well, with regard to the issue of VAT refunds, some of the other CARICOM jurisdictions, I believe Guyana is one of them, where the authority retains VAT collected, paid, and the tax authority itself disperses the refunds before paying out the net. What happens in Trinidad is that the tax authority has to go to the consolidated fund.
Yes.
Yeah. And get
sometimes
the,
it's
get
lost.
the funds and it's not there immediately. So therefore, that's why businesses would have the delay in getting VAT refunds. So where there is a distinct fund managed by the authority itself, the tax authority itself, that would speed up the VAT refund process.
All right, let's talk about the gate. Yeah. Gate being amended now. There's a means test. What's the impact it can have
now?
Well,
I would say the means test, I think the biggest argument against the means test is the perception of subjectivity. How do you quantify? Because you have different groups of people in the society. People who work in the formal sector, earn salaries and so on. It's easy to quantify their income. And then the persons who work in the informal sector. So how do you equitably allocate funding between persons who work in the formal and informal sectors when income for the informal sector is not easily quantified?
Yes.
There are other jurisdictions, such as the UK, where what they do is that there's a cap on the amount the schools can actually charge. I think it's £10,000 a year.
Okay.
And on top of that, the system really works on a loan, where you have 30 years to pay out that £10,000 a year, and after 30 years it's written off. So the deferral system, such as the UK, more transparent, less subjective, I would say.
All right. I want to talk about a recent article that we saw in the newspaper on the upcoming budget. It said that as the minister changes his focus from the CL financial debacle to the preparation of the 2018 budget, he could be facing a 10 billion shortfall in government revenues. How can this impact us? What measures should he implement in order to help to stable the economy a little bit?
Well, if he's facing a shortfall in revenues, it means almost automatically cutbacks in expenditure to bring the expenditure in line with the revenue. Alternatively, it would mean finding financing from alternative sources other than taxation revenue. Maybe perhaps borrowings. We have seen IPOs and so on, where shares of state-owned corporations have gone on the market, and probably accessing dividends from those organizations.
We've always been hearing about diversification, and we've put forward that issue to the minister, and he said it's easier said than done. How do we go about really? I mean, for years we've been talking about diversification away from oil and gas. Where do we begin?
Well, unfortunately, the impact of lower oil prices may end up pushing us in that direction.
On a positive note.
Fortunately.
Unfortunately, because because what will happen is that the energy revenue would have had our currency a little more highly valued than it would have made other sectors competitive. So unfortunately, we may see a continued sliding of the currency in the long run.
Yes.
And that would in effect make other sectors more competitive.
Now, we're seeing a lot of unemployment, and when you ask persons what are they doing, they're just still sending out resumes hoping to get a job. Not very many persons are going to agriculture or being innovative to start a new business. Why do you think it's that way? Is it that it's not attractive to start new businesses?
Well, I think that part of it has to do with culture, and the fact that for a lot of people, they have been cultured in go to school, get your qualifications, etc., and find a job, rather than being encouraged into entrepreneurship. So that perhaps one of the things that need to be looked at is how can we encourage entrepreneurship? How can we encourage people to get into business, and rather than seeking employment, employ persons? What kind of incentives can the government offer for persons to get into that?
All right. So any closing comments as we wrap up?
Well, certainly from our perspective, we look forward to the 2017-18 budget. We look forward to things happening in it in respect of property tax, transfer pricing, the new revenue authority, etc.
All right, so that's it for now. We're going to take a short break for the news. Thank you, gentlemen.